This book is called The Sound of the Sea. It was written by Jacqueline Harvey, and the beautiful paintings were done by Crossett. Jacqueline Harvey has become a well-known and very popular author in her native land of Australia. This is her website. The .au after .com brings you to a site that's centered in Australia. Also an Australian citizen is the artist Warren Crossett. He works at Melbourne Polytechnic and is an award-winning painter. He loved to come to the sea in the afternoons, to watch the waves, to smell the salt, to touch the sand. But most of all, he came here to remember. It wasn't always that way. It seemed so many of his memories of her weren't real. But in the crashing of the waves, he could hear her voice calling him. The smell of the salt reminded him of the days they went fishing together, when she taught him how to thread the wriggling worms on his hook. She had shown him how to cast the line without getting tangled up. The thought of it made him smile, just for a moment. A fisherman in the distance caught something. The bend of his rod made him remember the first fish they had caught together, a tiny whiting, which she carefully removed from the hook and threw back into the sea. She had tossed her head and laughed as he giggled with delight. "He's all slippery, Mommy. He wants to go home," he had told her. As the sun began to sink into the hills behind him, and the sky glowed pink, he thought of her cheeks, pink and flushed after they had raced along the sand to the rocks. He loved to catch the tiny crabs in the rock pools. She held his bucket and told him every time, "It's a fine day for catching crabs, Samuel Sullivan." It's a fine day for catching crabs. But then everything changed. She got sick. She had a cough. She said that her head was aching. She yelled at him when he made too much noise. He was afraid. She cried a lot. Everyone else cried a lot too. She gave him cuddles and told him she loved him more than anything. The house was all whispers and quiet. Lots of people came and told him, "Be a good boy for Mommy." He had tried really hard to be a good boy. But she went away, and she never came back. He had to go and live with his grandparents. They were so sad, and his heart hurt. He cried himself to sleep each night. He wanted her back. But he knew that she was gone. He was mad at her for going, so he tried to forget. For a long time, he didn't want to remember. He was angry, and he yelled at his grandparents when they wanted to talk about her. He made them put all the photographs away in a box. She was a bad mother. She should have tried harder to stay. She didn't care about him. Then, one afternoon, when she had been gone a very long time, Grandpa took him to the beach. He had tricked him into going. He said they were going to the shop. Grandpa said that he'd buy him an ice cream. When they pulled up at the beach, Sam wouldn't get out of the car. But the smell of the sea unlocked something inside of him. He sat steel-faced, determined not to get out, until he heard the seagulls calling. Then, without thinking, he opened the door and walked to the top of the dune. His grandfather was standing in the shallows, gazing at the sea. "Grandpa," he called. "Grandpa, she's here." Grandpa turned and looked at him. Plump tears rolled down his lined cheeks. "Yes, my darling boy, she's here." They stood together, his soft small hand gripped tightly to his grandpa's tired old one. They said nothing, but they both remembered. Every day he and Grandpa came to the sea. First of all, they just walked silently. Then, after a while, they started to talk. Just little things, here and there. One day, Grandpa brought an old fishing rod, and they caught some pippies for bait. They waded in the rock pools, and Sam looked for crabs. Every day they came, and he remembered. He wasn't mad at her anymore. He listened to her voice in the waves, and he loved her. She's here. This book, a collaborative effort between two Australian artists, is The Sound of the Sea, written by Jacqueline Harvey, illustrated by Warren Crossett.